Hello, welcome back to the Deep 404 and Happy New Year. To those of you who are in the time zone where we've already made it to New Year's, yes, I hope you have a Happy New Year already. For those of you who are still yet to get there, looking forward to you having a good 2024. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what's been happening in Ukraine in the last couple of days. Obviously, there has been the Russian missile strikes on Ukraine. The strike, which occurred 2 days ago, is reportedly the largest missile strike Russia has made upon Ukraine throughout the entire special military operation. There were reports at numerous stages during the day of up to 18 large Russian bombers being in the sky, the Tu-95s, the Tu-22s. Some of these carry six very powerful missiles at one time. So in that grouping of 18 aircraft, there was 108 missiles or more that would have been launched during those sorties. Reports came in through the day, so it appears as though there were multiple aircraft launches and missiles fired. So the total number fired, I don't know what that is, but reportedly the largest day of missile strikes. Interestingly, a number of these missile strikes appeared out in the west. If we go to the map here, map of Ukraine. Some of these areas out here in the west, even as far as Lvov in the far west of Ukraine, came under attack. Airfields, Khmelnytsky airfield here in this area has been struck a number of times during the conflict. Struck again, it is the primary home of the Su-24s. The Su-24s are the aircraft capable of carrying the Storm Shadow missiles. Those Storm Shadow missiles in the recent attacks with the use of those, the range that was indicated given for those, and so this was on the attack on the Russian landing ship in the ports. It was somewhere near getting up towards over the 350 kilometer range. So just on our map here from Mykolaiv down here, 400 kilometer range. So what this seems to indicate is that the Storm Shadow missiles that were used in that attack on the landing ship were actually the domestic version of the Storm Shadows, the ones which the UK would normally have kept just for their own use. The export missiles, as often happens with military equipment, what you produce for your own nation is of higher quality or higher spec than what's released internationally. So the original Storm Shadow missiles that were provided to Ukraine were of a shorter range. It appears that a larger range Storm Shadow missile was used here. Anyhow, that airbase where they most likely the Su-24s were launched from, carrying those Storm Shadow missiles, came under attack again, as did many other areas. Areas in Karkhiv came under heavy attack. Also, what appears to have been struck or targeted in this round of strikes, again, energy infrastructure hasn't been hit. Many people have suggested that Russians would go after the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. That may happen. There's one example of that, which I'll speak about in a moment, but in general, that hasn't occurred. Instead, what we've seen in this most recent round of attacks, these missile strikes, appear to have been aimed at command centres to a large extent. There's been a number of those hit. There's also been reportedly strikes that have been housing NATO mercenaries or NATO volunteers, however you wish to consider them. But fighters from other NATO nations in Ukraine preparing to fight against the Russian forces. Now, this reportedly, this has led to strikes on hotels, that type of thing. We've seen this in the past, where there have been Russian missile strikes on hotels, and what has come out is that those hotels were housing military personnel or military exhibits or conferences and that type of thing. So this is reportedly what has happened again here, is that some of these strikes in areas in what you would consider a civilian area, and even on what you would normally consider a civilian building, is because these civilian buildings have been commandeered by the military, are being used by the military. So, large Russian missile strikes. This then seemed to result in the attacks on Belgorod. Now, Belgorod up here. Oh, sorry, I haven't got the map on. Let's go up here. Belgorod up here, northeast, to the northeast of Ukraine. To the north of Kharkiv. This is Kharkiv down here below this orange line, Kharkiv region here. Belgorod here is within the traditional Russian borders. This orange line here gives you a very rough indication of the border between Ukraine and Russia in this area. Belgorod just here at the top of the map. Now, the strikes that have just occurred on Belgorod that have been launched by the Ukraine, these have caused some concern. They appear to have been a retaliatory strike for the Russian missile strikes. Now, the attacks on Belgorod, however, appear to have been ones done just to inflict terror and damage upon the Russian civilians living in Belgorod. The reported nature of the attacks, the weapons used, the targets struck, don't indicate that these were precise, targeted Ukrainian attacks on Russian military locations, military equipment, or anything of that nature, or even industry that may have been used in the production of Russian weapons, for example. This contrasted to the Russian strikes, which appear to be targeted strikes on facilities such as command facilities, repair facilities, industrial centres that are either developing or repairing Ukrainian weapons, fuel supplies, pole depots like petroleum, oil and lubricant depots. Those type of things are what the Russians seem to have struck. In Belgorod, it appears as though the attacks have been purely random, unguided attacks on the civilian population, in much the same way as in Donetsk City, where there has been ongoing shelling by Ukrainian forces of Ukrainian civilians. Just random shelling, not targeting military locations or infrastructure. It seems as though the same thing has happened here in Belgorod. In Belgorod, unfortunately here, 24 people have been killed, including 4 children, and 131 people have been injured. A number of those injured have subsequently been flown to Moscow, to medical facilities and hospitals in Moscow. So the sequence of events is the large Russian missile strikes all over Ukraine. This attack, which appears to have been just some sort of retaliation attack, as I say, not striking military, just striking civilians, trying to, no doubt, put pressure on President Putin and the Russian government by the Russian civilians, the public in Russia. However, Belgorod has come under attack a number of times during this conflict, even prior to, if my memory is right, prior to the July Ukrainian special military, special offensive, or counter-offensive, there were attacks and incursions into the Belgorod area. At no stage have any of these attacks appeared to have been in an attempt to destroy or Russian military facilities or disrupt Russian supply lines. These have appeared to have been an attempt to raise outrage among the civilians of Belgorod against the Russian government. However, it seems to have had the opposite effect, and if you look at the Russian military Telegram channels, the commentary going on there, the commentary going on Twitter, it appears as though, if anything, it has just strengthened the Russian resolve against the Ukrainian forces. So the timeline being, what seems to have happened is that the Russian missile strikes on Ukraine, then Ukraine and retaliatory attack against Belgorod, and then last night there appears to have been, or what seems to have perhaps been, a Russian retaliatory strike for Belgorod. At least that's what a lot of the pro-Russian channels, that's how they're framing it and positioning it. This was a small strike on a thermal energy production plant near Kyiv, and so that thermal energy production plant has been struck, and I imagine taken offline, damaged and taken offline. This is being portrayed as a Russian retaliation for the Belgorod attack, given that it's not part of a widespread attack on the energy infrastructure, the timing of it, and the fact that it will, while yes, it will have some impact upon military, it's going to have a larger impact upon civilians in the area. Whether this is the reasoning behind that attack, I can't say for sure, but that's how it's being presented at this stage. What was used in the Belgorod attack was 2 Olkha missiles with cluster munitions and Czech-made Vampire multiple launch rocket systems. The Ministry of Defense of Russia reports intercepting the Olkha missiles and the majority of the Vampire multiple launch rocket systems, but with some of them making it through the air defense there. If I can just go here, this image is reportedly, this image is a little bit hard to see, is reportedly showing the strike locations within Belgorod. So they're sort of over a number of city blocks and broadly distributed. Again, the reporting here is that where these strikes have occurred, there's no military or infrastructure in those areas. So it doesn't seem as though they have been targeted at military. It seems as though they have randomly been launched into that area. In terms of the rest of the Ukraine, I might just step through the Russian Ministry of Defense daily update on what's happening there. Just sort of cover off some of that and cover off some of the areas there. Obviously, Kyiv has been struck again, so Kyiv air defense seems to be struggling. Kyiv is where there will be the remaining Patriot systems operating. Now, there have been a number of Patriot systems reportedly destroyed, with some video evidence of at least one of those being destroyed, and some confirmation from the Pentagon in that case that one was, in their wording, was damaged. The Russians indicate they believe they had destroyed it, and there have subsequently been other cases of Patriots that the Russians indicate they have destroyed. If we just, I guess we might just move through the daily update and talk about some of that. So I'm just going to zoom this out a little bit. So starting up the top here in the Kupiansk area. So this reporting comes from the Russian Ministry of Defense. They provide a daily summary of activity. They also then provide a weekly summary. I'm just going to go through the daily summary from the last 24 hours, starting in the Kupiansk region in the north, which is this reddish orange line that you can see here in the top right of the screen. This is the area where the Zapad group of Russian forces are operating. Reportedly, they have been operating using attack helicopters, artillery. They have repelled 4 attacks of assault detachments of the Ukrainian 30th and 115th Mechanized Brigades close to Sinkovka. So the Ukrainians still attacking in this area around Kupiansk. The Ministry of Defense has indicated that they intercept Ukrainian communication transmissions, and based upon these intercepts, they're able to confirm the number of lost, killed and wounded Ukrainian men. As I say, this is the Russian Ministry of Defense, so take this with the level of skepticism that you feel it warrants, but this reporting is at least consistent in that it comes out each day. And we are able to verify some of the reporting of equipment losses that is given by the Russian Ministry of Defense on Telegram channels and seeing geolocated video footage of that. So for that reason, I use this reporting to give us some indication of what's going on. In the Kupiansk direction, the Russian Ministry of Defense reports that up to 120 Ukrainian troops were killed or wounded in yesterday's fighting, so heavy fighting in the Kupiansk area. One Leopard 2 tank, in reporting I saw yesterday, it's now indicating they believe that more than half of the Leopard 2s supplied to Ukraine have now been destroyed. 2 infantry fighting vehicles, 2 mortar vehicles, and during the counter-battery warfare, 2 US-made M777 artillery systems were hit. Also on the outskirts of Kharkiv city, a POL, a pole depot, petroleum, oil and lubricant depot of the 74th Support Centre for the Armed Forces of Ukraine was neutralised. So M777 artillery pieces being destroyed in the Kupiansk area. These are, some of the best Western artillery pieces that have been provided. Ukraine losing them now is a real loss for Ukraine because they're not able to replace them. They're not getting replacement systems of these sent from the US. As we move down a little down this red line to the top of the blue line here to the Krasny Liman area. In this area, this is where the units of the Center group of forces are operating. They have been supported by artillery and army aviation. They have repelled an attack by the 63rd Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, close to Shchervonaya Dvorova in the Lugansk People's Republic. The Ministry of Defense reports that Ukrainian losses are up to 50 troops, that's 50 men killed and or wounded in this area, 2 armoured fighting vehicles and 3 pickup trucks. As we move further down, now to the yellow area, this yellow area here, this is Donetsk city around here. Bakhmut is just up higher in the blue. So in the Donetsk direction, this is where the Yug group of forces operate. They have repelled 3 attacks of assault groups of the 56th Motorised Infantry, the 24th Mechanised and the 80th Air Assault Brigades of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, close to Bogdanovka. The total Ukrainian losses in this direction amounts to 300 troops. This is in the last day. 2 armoured fighting vehicles as well as 4 motor vehicles. Heavy counter-battery warfare going on in the area along the Donetsk line, with reportedly the Russian armed forces striking 1 US-made M777, 1 Polish-made GRAD self-propelled artillery system, 1 D-30 gun, 1 US-made M119 howitzer, as well as 1 US-made ANTPQ-50 counter-battery radar. For whatever reason, in today's reporting, a number of foreign pieces of equipment struck. So that's the third M777 reportedly destroyed yesterday. Also a Polish-made Crab. There's a self-propelled howitzer. And an M119 howitzer, but more importantly, a loss of another ANTPQ-50 counter-battery radar. So these radar systems are what allow Ukraine to detect where the Russian artillery pieces are, and then assist aiming the Ukrainian artillery back at those locations. In the South Donetsk area, so this is along our yellow line here. This is where units of the Vostok group of forces operate. They've repelled one attack launched by an assault group of the 127th Territorial Brigade close to Pryutny, which is just in the Zaporozhye area. And they have engaged the 79th Air Assault Brigade in the vicinity of the Novomykhailovka in the Donetsk People's Republic. So in this area around here, this is the Voremka Ledge, which is where the Ukrainians in their offensive walk down the ledge, down this waterway from Neskuchne, Strozhny, into Staromayorska, down into this area here. They have now started to be pushed back with Pryutny just here to the west of the ledge, and this is where reportedly fighting has been quite heavy as well. In this area, the Russian Ministry of Defense reports that up to 100 Ukrainian troops killed and wounded in yesterday's fighting, 2 motor vehicles destroyed, and in the counter-battery warfare, Russian troops hit 1 German-made FH-70 howitzer, and 1 M-Star-B howitzer, and 1 D-30 gun. So we're seeing in each of these areas, numbers of artillery pieces being lost, Ukrainians losing them. I'm sure that the Russians will also be losing some artillery in these counter-battery duels. However, the Russians are far more capable of being able to resupply them and backfill them, and I imagine to do so rapidly, while the Ukrainians, after yesterday or the night before's massive missile strikes, will be trying to deal with that. Their abilities to repair pieces of equipment like artillery pieces where the barrels have got hot and warped and need to be replaced, that is now being challenged as manufacturing sites were struck, repair facilities were struck, command facilities were struck. All of these make it difficult to gather up and repair pieces of artillery and get them back to the front line in time to be useful for fighting. In the Zaporozhye region, so moving along to our green line here, this is Verbove just here, and this is Robotyne here. The Ukrainians, there have been reported losses suffered around the Robotyne and Verbove as the Russian forces are pushing the Ukrainians back. This area, the Ukrainians made in their offensive, they took this land around Robotyne and Verbove and got down and actually touched the Surovikin, the first of the layered line of Russian defences. Their plan, of course, was to come down to take Tokmak, this area here in blue, and then from Tokmak get down to Melitopol, and then finally down to the Sea of Azov and cut off this area. Unfortunately for the Ukrainians, they weren't able to get past Verbove. They got to the outskirts. They're now being pushed out and losing that area there. In Zaporozhye direction, there have been Russian attacks upon the Ukrainian 111th Mechanized and 82nd Air Assault Brigades near Robotyne and Verbove. Reportedly, the armed forces of Ukraine have lost 75 servicemen killed and wounded, 2 armoured fighting vehicles, 3 pickup trucks, and 2 D-30 howitzers. There are reports in this area of retreats occurring where the Ukrainians are just losing positions and then just retreating out of there as the Russians follow after them. Moving down finally past the Kharkov Reservoir. Again, this area here, I spoke about this the other day. There's no real active front along here because of this reservoir. Now, remember, this reservoir, while on this map This looks like water. This is no longer water. This is now a small river flowing through here as the dam was blown months ago. So this is slowly drying out. Now, I'm guessing that this land must still be too marshy and muddy to support the proper transfer of military equipment, and that's why we don't have an active front line across here, because this is about a 5 kilometre gap, a little bit wider in some areas and a little bit smaller in others, but about 3 to 5 kilometre gap across here, which was all water beforehand. Anyhow, this is something which I think we'll have to keep an eye on, because I can imagine that as winter gets thicker and the ground freezes, this will become something which you could drive over. I may be wrong. I'm not a ground terrain expert. I don't know marshy land, how deeply it will freeze in these winter conditions, but you do hear about the ground freezing. So it's entirely possible that this area, which was underwater, which is muddy, but now with grass growing on it, and starting to dry out as it's been through the summer and now coming into the winter, that it may support heavy equipment. In that case, you would expect Ukraine somehow having to drag resources to protect this side of Zaporozhye and Kryvyi Rog, this area here as well, as the Russians could look to push across in any of a number of areas across this river, sort of drying out riverbed area now, to get to these two cities. I doubt that they would look to attack them head on, but they may want to head up through the middle here and then try to get around and then push up from this Zaporozhye region and look to perhaps encircle Zaporozhye and lay siege on Zaporozhye, and then plan what they do with it. But anyhow, that's all to come. Moving down then to the Kherson region and down here. In the Kherson region, reported Ukrainian losses are 25 servicemen killed or wounded, 3 motor vehicles, and 1 Avdiivka self-propelled artillery system. So we sort of see that all across the front line there are continued quite heavy losses for the Ukrainians in some areas. Donetsk, around this area, reportedly 300 men killed or wounded in a day over the course of a week. Those numbers certainly add up. The weekly summary for the week that has just gone does indicate sustained levels of losses for Ukraine, about over 4,500 reported killed and wounded Ukrainian servicemen in the last week, and a large number of artillery pieces for the week, over 115, I believe, in the last week alone of artillery pieces. So again, that's very difficult for Ukraine to be able to restock. All right. I'll leave that here. I might do another video on what's happening in Israel separately, and then do perhaps over the next day or so do a live stream. So just talk generally about what's going on in Ukraine, in the Middle East, a little bit in Africa as well. All right. Have a happy new year. I'll talk to you soon.